Okay, hi everybody. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I apologise for not having decked these particular halls in boughs of holly, but it is indeed Christmas time. It is the time of goodwill to all men. And just for absolute clarity, women and non-gender binary people as well. Okay, just to be absolutely clear, I'm not excluding anybody in that particular greeting. But it is a time for merriment, isn't it? It's a time for goodwill. It's a time to be happy. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is YouTube. And on YouTube, it's always the season to piss and moan, and there can be no exceptions. So indeed, that is what I plan to do in this video. Let's stick to form. Let's stick to a bit of YouTube tradition, shall we? But there is a little bit of a Christmas theme because I want to be talking about princesses and princess culture, Disney princesses, and all that kind of jazz, which is very much tied in, isn't it? Very much gets linked in with Christmas when people are watching those films. And it's a series of articles that were linked on the Washington Post. The first of them was the one that really caught my eye, and I just thought this is taking it to the next level here. And it was suggesting that films such as Snow White and Sleeping Beauty are problematic. God, I hate that word, because they are in a way endorsing sexual assault. So this article on the Washington Post, October the 18th, let me read you a little bit from it. It's titled, Disney Princess Kristen Bell has some real concerns about Snow White and consent. Okay, if these are real concerns, I dread to think what the marginal concerns of hers would be. Okay, it begins. As sexual consent survivors continue to share their stories, sparking a worldwide Me Too reckoning. I'm not sure if Snow White or Sleeping Beauty have shared their stories yet. Actress Kristen Bell is publicly expressing concern about Snow White and the prince who kissed her without consent. Bell, who provided the voice of Princess Anna in Disney's animated film Frozen, told Parents magazine that when she reads Snow White to her two young daughters, she poses a question. Don't you think that it's weird that the prince kisses Snow White without her permission because you cannot kiss someone if they're sleeping? I've got to say, if I posed that to my 4-year-old lad, I'd expect him to say something along the lines of, Dad, stop being a twat. I probably wouldn't expect him. I wouldn't want him to use language like that. You know, this is saving a person's life here. This is a person who has been poisoned into a sort of drug-induced coma by a magical piece of poisoned fruit. And the only way that that magical curse can be broken is with the kiss of a prince. So, I mean, you know, how can you liken that to a sexual assault? Anyway, this is how it goes on. Scholars, activists, and other parents have made similar arguments about the Snow White kissing scene, saying that Disney's adaptation of the German fairy tale fosters the wrong ideas about sexual encounters and consent. Kazu Muta, a sociology professor at Osaka University in Japan, wrote on Twitter last year that children's stories such as Snow White promote sexual violence. Sexual violence now. When you think rationally, okay, now we're thinking rationally at this point, right? This isn't going to be a load of garbled, stupid shite. This is rational thinking about Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. That tell of a princess woken up by the kiss of a prince, they are describing sexual assault on an unconscious person, she wrote in Japanese, according to Fox News. You might think I'm ruining the fantasy of it all, but these stories are promoting sexual violence and I'd like everyone to be aware of it. Okay, so I tell you what, let's think rationally about saving people's lives then. Okay, so somebody falls down unconscious in front of you and you check their breathing and you're not breathing. You haven't got a bag and mask there or any kind of artificial resuscitator. You could keep them alive, right, by giving them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but thinking rationally about it, they're not capable of giving them their consent, so the proper thing that you should do is just to fucking let them die. Obviously, that's what you should do, shouldn't you? I mean, this is beyond crazy. In terms of Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, you are talking about people who effectively have a very, very serious medical condition, albeit magic is involved, right, but it's only magic, we only only regarded as magic because it doesn't exist in our world. If it didn't exist in our world, then it wouldn't be magic. So it would just be a medical condition. They have medical conditions that are keeping them in a sleeping coma. And the way to break that will involve some mouth-to-mouth contact, right? In many ways, less mouth-to-mouth contact than would involve in mouth-to-mouth resuscitation of a casualty who is not breathing. What are we saying here? It even goes worse than this, even further down this rabbit hole. Listen to this. Earlier this year, Amnesty International Canada posted a rendition of the children's classic titled No Consent Equals No Fairy Tale, showing Prince Charming kissing an unconscious Snow White before groping the princess between her legs. Let me show you this clip.
What the Dude, seriously.
Yeah, dude. Seriously.
What? This? Nah, it's cool. I'm a prince. She's a princess.
So let me get this straight. Kissing an unconscious person to save their life is equivalent to sticking your hand right up their skirt and copping a damn good feel. I just can't believe what I'm watching when I watch. What kind of twisted, fucked up mind makes that kind of a connection? I don't know why they didn't have somebody, right? Why they didn't have somebody collapse on the street. They could have had a little skit, couldn't they? Where somebody collapses on the street and isn't breathing, and somebody starts giving them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and then starts copping a feel, right? Because it's the same thing, isn't it? Giving somebody the kiss of life to save their life, that's the same as sexual assault, isn't it? It's the same as sticking your hand up their fucking skirt, you freaks. What kind of twisted mind thinks along those lines? And these are people that are placing themselves morally above the rest of us when they can't distinguish between two acts such as that. What was interesting about this was that it led me down a little rabbit hole. You know as it does. You're reading the one article, then it leads you to another. Another that was a little bit more interesting, a little bit more measured, but nevertheless, I had some issues with it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, really, because it was about Disney princesses and princess cultures in a slightly wider context. And this was an article, it was back in 2016, Washington Post again, June 24th, Why Disney Princesses and Princess Culture Are Bad for Girls. Let me read you a little bit from that. Fictional princesses are perennial preschool favourites. Since Disney launched its princess brand in 2000, the Disney princesses have become ubiquitous, represented in virtually every product category, dolls and dresses of course, but also even seed packets and grapes. Partly as a result, little girls strongly identify with princess culture, and adults often assume girls naturally love princesses. When girls dare to be different, it's unexpected and delightful. Like the little girl who recently sparked widespread adoration and praise by dressing as a hot dog instead of a princess for her dance studio's Princess Day. Quite why, just to intervene there, quite why she got praised for dressing as a fucking hot dog when it wasn't a dress as whatever you like, it's fancy dress day. It was a Princess Day. She dressed as a fucking hot dog and she's been praised for it. What about if it had been a dress as a mechanically recovered meat product in a flaccid bun day and she'd come dressed as a fucking princess? Would somebody have praised her then and gone, you're really thinking out the box there, honey, well done for that one? Okay, quite why she got praised for that I don't know, but anyway, she's a little girl, let's just praise her, why not? But as I have previously argued, princess culture is not all fun and games. Oh no, it's quite sinister really, isn't it? The Disney Princess brand suggests that a girl's most valuable asset is her beauty, which encourages an unhealthy preoccupation with physical appearance. Okay, well, you haven't demonstrated that at that point. You're quite correct. It probably does suggest that a girl's most valuable asset is her beauty, and it maybe is a little bit one-dimensional at times. But you haven't proven that there. The brand also implies that girls should be sweet and submissive and should expect a man to come to their rescue in an act of love at first sight. Although newer characters like Elsa, Anna, Merida and Rapunzel behave in ways that correct these ideas. As a whole, the brand remains out of step with modern ideas about raising girls. There is some truth in that. Just let me say there is some truth in that. It is a very passive, tends to be a very passive sort of role model of girls waiting for a guy to rescue them. But it's interesting how we view that, isn't it? It's very much viewed from one-sided perspective there. I take on board that point, and the idea that some of the modern characters, I'll talk a little bit later about Merida in Brave, it's good that they're a little bit more fleshed out, but there is another side to that coin, which is that there's the same stereotype as well, that men and boys are somehow obliged to save girls and women, even if it means putting them in mortal danger. And while a lot of these stereotypes in media have gone, if you look at the Bond films, for example, a lot of the female stereotypes of Bond's assistants, etc., have gone, and they're a lot more dynamic and active characters and capable of looking out after themselves. They're not just a bit of love interest for Bond. The male stereotypes still remain. A man is still expected to throw himself in front of a bullet to save a woman. So perhaps those should be going now. Maybe we should be getting to a position where the guys are going, no, I'm not going to save you. You can save yourself, or find another woman to save you. Why should I feel obliged to save you? Why should I feel obliged to jump in front of that bullet just because you're a woman when I wouldn't if you was a guy? You know, it's got to work both ways, hasn't it? If that's the kind of society you want, then there needs to be a little bit of even-handedness there, I would say. Let me talk about a study, and this study was in a journal called Child Development. It was by somebody called Sarah Coyne, and what Sarah did is that she looked at a lot of young girls and also some young boys and assessed them at 2 points. It was a longitudinal study. Assessed them at 1 point and then assessed them at another point and looked at their sort of behaviours and attitudes and asked how much of this princess media they had consumed in the intervening period. And as it says here, according to this study, it detailed the negative effects of princess culture on girls. So it's making a specific claim there that it is the princess culture that is having this negative effect, that there's a causation. It's not just suggesting some correlation. We're getting into the same territory that I picked the BBC up on the other day. And what's interesting, so let me read you this little bit out. So she and her team designed and executed a study of 198 preschool and kindergarten aged girls and boys. Their findings reinforce some serious concerns about princess culture. For instance, the more the girls in the study engaged with princess culture, the more they behaved in stereotypically feminine ways. Girls with a lower body image when the study began tended to be more interested in princess culture a year later. There was no evidence that girls' engagement with princess culture influenced girls' behaviour for the better. Princesses' potential as positive pro-social role models is limited. What it did find actually is that more boys, or that boys that engaged more with princess culture tended to have better pro-social behaviour. And just first, before I tell you what I think is the real problem with this, there's a lot of confusion in this. It lists there seemingly that behaviour in a stereotypically feminine way is a negative effect. And indeed it says here, the authors found that girls were more stereotypically feminine in their behaviour than, in brackets, considered a negative outcome of princess culture. But then in another article about Sarah Coyne, just 2 days previously, she says, a lot of people say, so what? We want our girls to be girly, Coyne said. And there's nothing inherently wrong with being feminine, but research has shown a strong adherence to female gender stereotypes can be limiting across time. There seems to be some kind of double talk here between being feminine, and by being feminine they mean in stereotypical ways, but being stereotypically feminine. In other words, putting the word stereotypical in front of feminine to describe being feminine. And really that's kind of doublespeak. It's kind of wanting your cake and eating it. And what I get here is it's kind of not wanting to offend anybody. My guess would be that Sarah Coyne does regard those things as negative, but doesn't really want to have to deal with the flack of people saying, well, bollocks to you, I'm a woman, I like being stereotypically feminine, right? and don't you slag me off. So effectively what she, well, there's nothing really wrong with it. There's nothing really wrong with being feminine in stereotypical ways, but really being stereotypically feminine is quite limiting. It's a kind of doublespeak, and I'm sure you'll have heard that before because I've heard that before. But what was a real problem for me, and that was both in terms of the findings for the girls and the boys, is that the study in no way differentiated which way round these things occurred, and it just assumed it was consuming more princess media that had the effect. Let me read you this passage here from the June the 22nd article. Among girls, higher princess engagement was associated with stronger adherence to stereotypically feminine behaviour. In other words, the 3 to 4 year olds who love Frozen's Elsa, for example, were more likely to gravitate towards girly things, Coyne said. However, you could just as easily have written the 3 or 4 year olds who gravitate towards girly things are more likely to love Frozen's Elsa, because that could easily be just that way round as well, couldn't it? In fact, that's what we would assume. If you're interested in girly things, if you gravitate towards girly things generally, then you're going to gravitate towards these Disney princesses. And yet the assumption is here that if you're watching the Disney princesses, then that is why you're gravitating towards girly things. And there's absolutely there's no way that this study has demonstrated that at all. And it's even worse when this study looks at the boys, because what it does say is it says over this year period, the boys who engaged more in princess material displayed more positive characteristics, i.e. not male characteristics, because now male characteristics are the negative ones. It seems to be basically, if you want a little sort of cliff notes on this, if men are displaying stereotypically male attributes, then they're negatives. If women are displaying stereotypically female attributes, then they're negatives. But if you cross over the other side, then all is good. But there was no differentiation here. There's no way did they weed out the fact that maybe some boys are more drawn towards those things, right? And that's why they're viewing them, and those are the kind of boys that obviously are displaying more feminine characteristics. They're not displaying those feminine characteristics because they've watched fucking Frozen. They're watching Frozen because they have these more feminine characteristics, and so are drawn to that kind of material. Okay, so I thought that was really, really poor, and it got two articles in the fucking Washington Post. That what I wanted to talk about was just to give my feelings in a wider context with regard to this, and with this whole sort of Disney princess phenomena and role models and children with regard to these things. And it's an interesting thing. I've watched the film now several times, Brave, with my little boy, and that features a Disney princess called Merida, who is very much unlike the typical Disney princess. She is very, very dynamic. She is the active agent in that film. She is the hero with the bow and arrow, in actual fact, rather than the passive one. And it's very much about positive female role models. And if you look at the reviews for that film, you'll see all this being pointed out. You could add to that if you looked at that film, actually, what you have is a film with two major female characters, the mother and the daughter. There is a third, there's a sort of nanny who's really in there for big tits gags, right? For things falling down her tits, etc. But really there's two main female characters, and they are both active agents within the film, highly motivated individuals, highly intelligent individuals, practical individuals, skilled individuals, and, you know, everything that you could want in those terms of things. And they are pretty much the only female characters other than that nanny within the film, and the rest of the cast is a male cast. And the male cast is every egregious negative male stereotype you could imagine. They're thick, they're stupid, they're boorish, They're drunk half the time. They overconsume on food. They're very, very aggressive. Merida can be very aggressive, but in a controlled way that makes sense with the circumstance. These guys aren't. They're just ignorant. They just want to fight with one another, fight with everybody. They don't listen to anything. They don't understand anything. Every single negative stereotype, pretty much, other than rapist, I suppose, that you could think of male characters are portrayed in the male cast, and I cannot think of one particularly redeeming male cast member. Even the king, the father, who's a decent guy, but he's stupid, and he's ignorant, and he's too violent, and he just acts on a whim, and he doesn't listen to anybody. There is not one redeeming male cast member amongst the dozens and dozens and dozens of male cast members there. Only mentioning that because if that was the other way round, I'm sure that would be a huge, huge bone of contention. And yet this is a film praised for its positive role models. But Merida is a breath of fresh air in that. And I've watched the film several times because my dad loves the film. He loves the characters within the film. So I don't really have a problem, by the way, just in case you're interested. I don't have a real beef with those male characters because it's a fucking film and you have caricatured characters. And some ways, times it's going to work one way round and some ways it's going to work the other way round. So I don't have a problem with that. But I wanted to contrast that because that seems to be a little bit out on a limb. What we're talking about with these things is trying to sell sort of typically male characteristics and heroes to a female market, to a young female market. And this sort of idea that effectively men and women, boys and girls, they don't differ in any way, and it's only society that's selling them these different characteristics, these gendered characteristics. And I do suspect that there's an element in that is absolutely total and utter bollocks, because Brave is really a bit of an outlier there. And I want you to compare that to something else that I watch with my little boy, which is Nella the Princess Knight. Okay, I'll show you a bit of Nella the Princess Knight running alongside me. And the thing with Nella the Princess Knight is in many ways she's like the Brave character, in that she's the agent, she's the hero. It's like we're getting these kind of amalgamated characters where the princess, like Nella the Princess Knight, the princess is also the knight. But the amusing thing is they can't, even Brave can't dispense with the princess thing. She still has to be a princess, because unless it's a princess, the audience won't be interested in it. She can't just be a knight, she has to be a princess knight. But Nella the Princess Knight still has all the things. Her horse is a fucking unicorn that paints its toenails and obsesses about doing its makeup, doing its hair and doing its toenails. Her bow shoots spangly banners whenever she fires it, right? She's effectively all the feminine stereotypes that you already had, but she has a bow and arrow and a sword.
My heart is bright, time to be a princess knight. My heart is bright, it's time to share my light. My courage shining bright, now I am the princess knight.
Which is kind of amusing and depressing in equal measures. And it's kind of a sort of, if that's what it takes, right? And I see a lot of this. I see science kits now. I see a lot of children's TV because I've got a little boy. And I see a lot of children's TV. And what I see now are toys that are aimed for girls are still aimed at girls. Like dolls, they're always aimed at girls. Toys that were aimed at boys, like Lego, like science kits, are still aimed at boys, but they're now also aimed at girls, which is a bit of a problem in itself, really, because what we're doing is we're expanding the avenues of girls, which are already expanded. They're already outperforming boys at schools in almost every single area. But we're so concerned about it, we're expanding the experience of little girls, but still not giving a fuck about boys, right? So the girls are going to get all the boys stuff, but well, don't worry about the boys. They can just do what they like, right? They can decide for themselves, apparently. But all the girls stuff that you see advertised, there was the boys stuff. Whether it's Lego, it's kind of Lego but with a very girly social theme. It's dress your little Lego characters up in different haircuts and shit. Right. If it's a science kit, it's science kit to make jewellery or to do something, make little fucking brooches or something such as that. All these things are dressed up so that they are still maintaining all those same feminine stereotypes. And whilst it might be a good thing that there's now science kits that will be attractive for girls and Lego that's more attractive for girls, I have no problem with that. It's kind of hard to reconcile this idea that boys and girls are not intrinsically different in some ways when these toy manufacturers who are desperately falling over themselves to please everybody and make their boys' toys available to girls are doing the research and realizing that to sell them to girls, they've still got to dress them all up in all this feminine bollocks to do so. Okay, interested in what you think about that. A lot of ground covered in this video. I apologize for that. It was a train of exchanges that I saw on the Washington Post going from the Snow White and Sleeping Beauty's sexual assault thing through to this piece of research that girls watch princess material are therefore, as a result of that, more stereotypically feminine, when there's absolutely no reason to suppose it isn't the other way round, that the more stereotypically feminine girls are more drawn to that kind of material. And then this idea of where we step outside the box, which is, like I say, it's something that I agree with. I like the idea of more active roles for female characters. Why not? But you've got to cut it both ways for one thing, right? Stop stereotyping maybe the male characters in quite the same way. Give them a little bit more thought, perhaps, as well. Take the obligations off them that they had that was a result of this way of thinking from decades ago. And what do you finally think about this idea? Because you must have seen it. Everything is being advertised now with these things for girls, but including the boys' bits as well, including the sword and the arrow, including the science kits and the Lego and the boys' toys. But it still has a pink fucking bow on it, doesn't it? Still seems to have a pink bow on it. What do you think about that? Okay, this will be out before the new year. Hope you had a good Christmas. Have a happy new year. Thanks for watching, and bye.